I think, therefore, for me, perhaps I was a bit lucky that I never had anybody breathing down my neck saying, "Oh, well, of course, you know, this is not really right. This is not social policy, or this is not political science, or this is not history." It felt to me like this was a rather fluid universe. And so I suppose if I was asked to define interdisciplinarity, I would simply think of fluidity. I would think of academic and intellectual fluidity, and I would say that is
In climate change or the environment, or you know, some of the other major challenges that require us to draw on different disciplines, to draw on different methodologies. And I guess it's been encouraged by the funding bodies and so on as well. But you know, I think, you know, what Nick said, that we shouldn't feel, you know, in particular early career academics shouldn't probably feel nervous about this. But I think we were discussing earlier, I think there's a perception, certainly amongst some, that interdisciplinarity is risky in some respect, particularly as an early career researcher, and I don't agree with that. I think it opens up opportunities, but I think maybe that it's an issue that we would want to address. This conference is completely, to me, interdisciplinarity. I'm looking up there at Sinead, one of my colleagues from Consumer Studies, and her work so easily fits into many of, you know, of the themes in this conference, as it would in social policy, Sinead, I think, as well.
Joanne?
Hello, everybody. Well, my problem with the concept of interdisciplinarity is it presupposes the notion of discipline. And it's the problem, the concept of discipline I have a particular issue with. And that is particularly pertinent when you're talking about law and legal research. Now, I've been on 3 REF panels. First was in 2008, the second was in 2014, and the third was in 2021. And I can honestly say that the field or discipline of legal research has changed absolutely radically in that period. And what you've got now in law is a sort of multi-methodological, multidisciplinary field. I mean, in a sense, law has always been a sort of ill-defined as a discipline. That discipline was a word that we called upon to get recognised in the as a proper university area of study in the late 19th century, when you know, Oxford and Cambridge were still teaching canon law, and everything else didn't count as proper knowledge. And so what's happened really is that we appealed to the idea of a discipline to get recognition within the academic community. It is, after all, just construction, a way of mapping knowledge. But once you do that, what came with that was a sort of privileging of a particular idea or a particular approach to legal scholarship, which actually in itself is interdisciplinary. That was doctrinal or black letter scholarship, which of course draws upon and builds upon the methodological conceptual techniques of analytical philosophy. It's just analytical philosophy applied to legal concepts. But also there's a tradition in legal history, and then the development of law and society and socio-legal studies from particularly the 1960s onwards, you see that. So when you get to 2021, law is distinguished in the sense that it's neither a social science nor exclusively social science or exclusively humanities. And that can be a problem when universities have been organised and you keep getting pushed into the social sciences, but half your department wants to do legal philosophy or legal history or something to do with law and culture and law and the arts. But the bottom line is that today, legal research in the UK, which is where I can properly claim some experience and expertise, is multi-methodological and multidisciplinary. And I think one of the reasons for that change during that period, not the only reason, one reason is the reason that Anne-Marie gives, is that legal scholars are being required to respond to massive challenges in the world today. And wherever you've got a problem and challenges, law is always perceived to be part of the solution. So that's one. Another really distinct feature of the changing landscape for legal scholarship is the advent of the PhD student in law. So when I entered legal academia in the mid-1980s, I didn't have a PhD. Nobody ever suggested I do a PhD. I'd done a master's, I trotted law, and started learning how to do this teaching and writing stuff. But, by the early 2000s, it was becoming much more standard. And I think that has definitely contributed to greater interdisciplinarity, not least because our PhD students are learning social science research techniques. And so you see more of that in our research, more use of empirical techniques and so on and so forth. So I think, what am I trying to say? What it says, yes, interdisciplinarity is great, but at the same time, I worry about the notion of privileging interdisciplinarity in law, that it might inadvertently reinforce a notion of legal research as some kind of autonomous pursuit of doctrinal or black letter law, and that's the discipline of law and everything else is interdisciplinary. That's not what we see when we do the ref.
Okay. Yeah, go for it, Nick. Yeah.
I just want to hope that people might jump in if they say something.
Yeah, well, sorry, we've got a roving mic or a mic that can rove. Please stick your hands up when we all agree that we'll take as many questions as possible. So as the spirit moves you, please do intervene. Thank you.
Sorry, I was only just going to add to that, really, that maybe I can see what Joanne, it's exactly what you're saying there. I think it's a little bit different maybe for us.
Yeah.
I mean, social policy, like Anne-Marie said, social policy has always been eclectic. I mean, it's never really had a kind of firm centre, and that's a good thing, I think, in many ways. I think for the ref, just to be clear about this, I mean, because some of you here, looking at the themes in some of the papers, the paper titles and so on, I mean, some of you actually could quite easily end up in the social policy and social work panel. It really wouldn't be that surprising at all. And I think we want to reassure you that the social policy panels really don't have any, they just really don't make a distinction between or among these different quotes unquote disciplines. I remember when we were writing the descriptors. I spent days trying to write a descriptor about what the social work and social policy panel would actually look at. And if you're not careful, actually in the end you had to sort of chop stuff off just to make sure that you weren't kind of colonising every other subject in social sciences. But it is a very broad brush, put it that way, and we would welcome that. And just to be very clear about one other thing, and I'll shut up again, that if you are concerned, career-wise, about maybe publishing only in particular journals, because otherwise somebody comes along, you'll have a department or a theme, and someone comes along and says, well, of course, you can't really publish in that journal because it's not a journal X for that discipline. The ref panels are under an obligation to take no notice whatsoever of the source of an output. And in fact, if we did take note of the source of an output, we'd be called out on it. We are simply not allowed to do that.
So in terms of the rep, to be very clear, we do not make judgments about the source of an outcome. Very
I
important.
think I can ask that because we were talking a little bit beforehand about the fact that very good scholars of law are sometimes encouraged by senior professors or discipline to aim for what's called the main and prestigious law journals. Now, from the point of view of the ref, that's a complete waste of time. We rarely register where anything is published. I mean, especially now because it's all so much of what we read is online. So it's really important that we apply criteria which is original, significant, and rigor. We don't look at so from the point of view of being an interdisciplinary researcher or a researcher who maybe doesn't feel that their work fits within some of the more traditional law journals, that's absolutely fine. The choice of journal or the choice of outlet and chapters and books, of course, are equally valid and valuable, should be based on where am I likely to get my readership from? How do I get my ideas out to the readership, the people I want to see and read that? That should be your choice and your decision, not Professor so-and-so told me that I have to publish it from that. Yeah, and one of the things we're really, really trying to do, and I'm sure it's the same with you guys, is that constantly there's a lack of correspondence between what the law ref panel is saying about what we value in law, what counts to law in terms of the ref, and what you're getting from your own institutions. So the important thing is that I think if you read our overview of the ref in law, that will give you a good idea of its breadth and its interdisciplinarity. And also it's housed within main panel C, which is all of the contiguous disciplines, including social policy and sociology, so you can look at that as well.
I've got someone who wants to come in. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you very much. My name is Ben Hudson, I'm based at the University of Exeter, and what I was going to say directly follows on from what has been said since I raised my hand. So you read my mind, and I know, Joanne, you're coming to visit us soon to talk about the ref. I'm just wondering what more could be done to sort of get the messages that you're saying across in institutions, because in my position as an ECR, me doing work on migration and climate change is very much welcomed. Yet, when it comes to the ref, already thinking, of course, about the next ref, when I'm applying for study leave or so on, I'm asked, okay, but what paper could go into modern law review or ICLQ? So then I am spending time planning my research over the next 5 years with kind of what I'm doing and what I am doing in other disciplines or publishing in other journals which aren't mainstream law journals, and then every year sort of saying, okay, well, this could be my reference for this year, and it would go into modern law review. I'm just wondering what more could be done across the sector, aside from maybe it's just more roadshows around the country, but what could be done to get these messages across into our institutions?
I was just going to jump in quickly, and I'm not a law person, so Joanne really answer this, but I think she mentioned something right at the end there before you asked her the question, which is very important. Give your, whoever they are, partner, gun, give them the reports from the panels and tell them to read them. Because if they read those reports, they will see what we say. We obviously, my sets of journals are not yours, but the same thing would go for us. If say, we only took articles from the Journal of Social Policy and Social Policy and Administration, and we didn't look at anything else, and I can't imagine anything more stupid for one thing, but it would be crazy, because we would miss the discipline, actually, would miss an enormous amount of richness, a huge amount of richness. That other types of journal will mine. So I'll be quiet now, but For me, read the reports. We spent months writing those reports and getting them right. Just precisely for these institutions to read.
We were so careful about the messages we were sending. I think part of the problem, Ben, by the way, that you're identifying is a problem what I call the STEM bias at universities. So what you've got is the further up the management you go, the more removed decision making is from what's going on at the disciplinary field level. And maybe I'm being overly generalized. It seems to me that university senior management is packed with people from the STEM subjects, and they have a particular view of what counts for purposes of research, and that's getting into these stellar international journals. That's where the whole concept of internationally excellent research comes from. It's a STEM criterion which doesn't apply to law, which is, has a very clear jurisdictional basis. So what you've got is you've got some give and take. You can educate your law senior managers, but then they're getting pushed back from the faculty or getting pushed back from the University Research Committee. So it is really quite difficult, but you just have to keep hanging on, and I will keep doing roadshows.
I do feel your pain in asking that question, because I think many of us have been through a process like that, where we've been encouraged to publish in particular places. And I think one of the challenges for all academics, but particularly for early career academics, is the institutional promotions criteria very often cite things like impact factors of journals and so on, and people are driven towards that as well. But I think it would be quite interesting to think about what more REF can do in terms of communicating with institutional hierarchies about this, because I think we've had, this is my first time in the REF panel, but I know in years past we quite often had members of the REF panel come and talk to our unit and explain that. And I remember Hugh Bogle in great frustration once saying, I do not know how many more times or how many more ways I can say this, place of publication doesn't matter, and you still get the kind of almost diktat coming down about where you want to put. And I think it's got better at Ulster, and I do feel certainly within social sciences it's got much better, and we're not asked those questions in the way that we used to be, but I do think that it is still a challenge in some places.
I've got someone who'd like to.
Yeah, there's actually two questions up here, so will we take them together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Hello, and every time I hold a mic like this, I want to sing karaoke. So, you walked into a party like you were walking to a yacht. That's my family's favorite song. So, hello, my name is Signa Domshanks, and I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa in Canada. So if I start talking about refs, we better start talking about hockey, because that's what that term means to me. I've been teaching since 1998 now, and my PhD's in history, but I'm trained as a lawyer and I'm very active with the profession. And I was just wondering if the four of you have any tiny topics, perhaps, that have recharged you over the years to, while you're by yourself and while you don't have colleagues' support necessarily, or you don't have, I think you say head of school here, when you don't have their support, but you know in your heart interdisciplinary is where it's at, what have you held on to? Because I'll just say one of the things I hold on to is the passing of regulations, and I tell people who are interested in interdisciplinarity, if it involves law, they have to look at the regulations, because that's the moment where they know that politics matters, and they know that topics in society can influence politicians who then pass regulations that impact the interpretation of law. So I go deep about that to sort of make sure I don't poke my eyes out every time I have a faculty council meeting. And so I was just wondering if the rest of you could sort of reveal if there's some topics that you've sort of hung on to as an anchor to sort of help you dive into your own topics or support graduate students or just get through the next faculty meeting that is horrible. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Eva Gabaz and I'm from University of Leicester.
so complete opposite. I just started my PhD, it's my first year, and my research project is mainly law, but would benefit hugely from political science and democratization sort of elements. However, I am not trained in any of those fields, and what my concern is the viva. What if I do get those questions which on theories that I don't necessarily know about? And I don't want you to obviously give me a lecture on that, but how much interdisciplinarity is enough and not too much at the same time? That would be my question probably. Thank you.
That's a good question. Both are good questions.
I think I'll just be very quick. I think on the first question, I've sort of, you wouldn't think it now, I've kind of evolved over time. So I'm not entirely sure that I could give you an answer to that. Where I started, and my PhD was on the Labour Party, the UK Labour Party, and British socialism and concepts of equality. And I mean, maybe the driving feature or fact that I've always really wanted to worry about, and I still do, is simply equality. And then, of course, everyone goes, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm not even going to tell you that. But it does motivate me still, unquestionably. On the second question, it's a really difficult one because I think I have hope, because I think for the doctorate, inevitably your doctorate is going to be a relatively narrow study. It has to be. And if your examiners are any good at all, they'll stick within the parameters of the study. And they will not expect you to suddenly become a political philosopher unless you, excuse me, dangle a carrot that makes them ask the question. But if you don't do that, and you probably shouldn't for a doctorate, you should be okay, I think. As long as you stick within the parameters, and any examiner should understand that, in my view. I think maybe it is postdoctoral that we're beginning to think of kind of moving out a bit. I remember my external examiner during my viva said, okay, you've done this now, but what are you going to do next? He said, because actually you don't want to just keep on doing exactly the same thing all the time. What are you going to do next? That's the moment, I think, maybe to kind of expand. But for the doctorate, it is a relatively bound piece of work. So I'd be okay.
I don't know. I think the problem with most of the PhD students I are supervised is they don't know what their parameters are. That's the big challenge.
By the time you get to the end of it.
Yes, but I think the point that Eva is making is something to do with you define your field, yeah? And I think it's fine to bring two contiguous fields together around a research question, but if you can try and see it as like in terms of concentric circles, so your research question or set of questions are at the heart, and then you want to try and bring these different fields in conversation with one another. No examiner is going to expect you to be totally au fait with all of this political science just because you've used some political science literature and tools, but they will expect you to be on top of the literature and tools that you draw upon. So that's the key thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's such an interesting question, but it was actually fresh in my mind because I've just recently examined a PhD, or been internal examiner for a PhD that was cross-disciplinary, I guess, between computing and social work. And I think it was a really successful thesis because I think the student really finding that she drew on as much as she needed to from the fields that she was looking at. But I would also say I think what her supervisors had also done very well was she chose the external very wisely, because the external had also some of that interdisciplinary experience and was really, sensitive I think, to those challenges and was approaching the thesis from examining an interdisciplinary piece of work and the challenges that brings with it.
That's really important. I mean, I mean, I don't mean it in a corrupt way at all, but I mean, we should have there should be a dialogue about your expertise. Of course there should. You know, you're not going to write something and then give it to the person who hates you. You know, of course you're not. Yeah.
I think another aspect earlier in the process is the supervision team. And having supervisors, more than one, who have capacity, complementary capacities. And the ESRC has just recommissioned its doctoral training partnerships, so big investment. And they've put a lot of money and a lot of specifications. Interdisciplinarity was very much to the fore, and one mechanism for that they specified was, how are you going to enable a breadth of supervisors? And that doesn't solve the problem. The concentric circles is still a good model for managing that, but I think the system is becoming more aware of the need to enable it and to provide capacity. We've got someone up the back, I think, here.
Yes, I'm Jonathan. I'm from the University of Oxford. I'm a mixed model researcher. I have a question regarding methodologies and nowadays what are the current trends. I feel like quantitative methods are prevailing. When we look at the ERC, most grants were awarded to legal scholars who excel in that field, which I also did. I feel like I'm becoming a computer scientist instead of a lawyer. What would you recommend as an early career researcher to focus on? Qualitative research or?
It depends on what it is you want to research. The one answer I would give to that question is you choose your area, the area you want to research, and the questions you want to ask, and then you pick the method that helps you answer those questions. Now, I know we're all encouraged to get research grants and everything else, and certainly if you're doing empirical research, it is much more important because it can't be library or desk-based. So I think up to a point, you might, I can see you're trying to be a bit strategic here. Should I get my quants up in order to maximize my chances of getting a grant? But to be honest, it's much more important, and this is me speaking as someone who's read a lot of research council proposals, it's much more important to have an authentic proposal, a good research question, a good methodology, be able to locate it in your field. So I would think more about that than whether or not I should go for quants just because it looks like it's on trend with the SRC.
I totally agree with that, actually. I don't want to say too much about it. I think the danger of getting stuck in one particular method, is not always a good thing. If you see what I mean. If you are naturally more qualitative in your approach or naturally more quantitative, then follow it. And I think where I started at the beginning was to say that we live in a much more fluid world. What you were saying now, I mean, the issues that are out there and are plaguing us in some ways are by definition require different perspectives and an interdisciplinary approach to just about anything I can think of nowadays. So the methods will come from that. I think they'll come from your interest. I could argue, I must have read about, I don't know, about 430 outputs, something like that, over ref. There were a massive range of methods in there. And as long as the method was appropriate, sufficiently appropriate to the paper or to the book or to whatever it was, and elucidated the arguments and actually informed, the research and the thinking that is going on, then that's all that matters. Some people want to pursue a career in methods. That's fair enough. But I wouldn't want to do that personally. But some people do that. That's great. Otherwise, they are tools. They are tools that you use, and use the ones that are appropriate for you. One thing I have a great regret about is I never did any formal quants. When I was training, it just wasn't done.
And I do rather regret, I mean I can do it now well enough, but I do rather regret that, actually. But that's not to say that I wish I'd been a complicated statistical person necessarily. But I think it is about fitting the methods to the research you're doing, the other way around.
And again, because we're talking about interdisciplinary, one of the joys of interdisciplinary teams is that if you feel your research question would benefit from different methodologies, you can build a team in that way, so that you're bringing on people with maybe with expertise and something that you don't have, which would bring an added dimension to how you look at the problem.
Summary, just to add to that, if you think you need training or you'd like training, push for it in your institution, in your department. Look for funding. As a socio-legal scholar, that's an important part of developing your capacity. So a lot of institutions now offer quant for qual, short taster courses, lunchtime courses, where you can get a foothold, which might not, I think Joanne's absolutely right, you can't, simulate quant's expertise if you haven't got it, but you can show you're going in that direction and maybe develop in the way that Anne-Marie and Nick were saying. Karen.
Oh, hi there, my name's Lucy Series. I've spent the past 6 months in a school for policy studies at Bristol University. But before that, I spent almost a decade in a school of law at Cardiff, so this panel really speaks to me. And before that, my original research training was in psychology and philosophy. So I just wanted to draw a contrast between interdisciplinarity and discipline hopping, because I think there are quite different career implications for both of those. My experience in law and policy is that they're enormously welcoming of interdisciplinary research. I felt very, very at home in a research context in both schools and both disciplines, and the SLSA kind of feels like family for that reason, I suppose. I think for career reasons, though, law is a harder discipline to jump into, and that's because of teaching. That law schools are obliged to offer a core curriculum, and policy of course does, but I think it's much more generous in what it can accommodate. I think if you come from outside the law and you jump into law and you're an interdisciplinary researcher, you'll have quite a different career experience than someone who's got a qualifying law degree, can easily teach the core syllabus and has branched out into another discipline. And I wondered if the panel could offer reflections on how law potentially could address that challenge actually for people moving disciplines around teaching rather than research.
Well, one way we have done it is if we have a PhD student in our own institution who comes from another discipline, then we encourage them to develop some law teaching experience while they're a PhD student. And that is necessary so long as the core curriculum defines undergraduate law degrees. But with the latest changes in terms of how you qualify as a solicitor, there is some room for, if you like, recreating the law curriculum. Not a huge amount of room, I have to say, because there are still obligations to meet both to the bar and also to the masses of overseas bar requirements, which all insist on the core. But there is room for being more creative around what constitutes your core law curriculum in England or in the UK than there was. But generally, as things stand, the best thing you can do is get PhD students to develop some legal speciality in the core while they're doing their research. It is a problem, Lucy, and one that we've tried to deal with that way. But it's a structural problem. Yeah.
We've got another question up here.
Hi, my name is Ivana Radacic. I'm from Croatia. I'm at the Institute of Social Sciences, as when I actually came back from doing a PhD in London, I was taught that it's too exotic to do women's rights in Croatian legal academia in, when was it, 2007. And it has been a challenge to work in an interdisciplinary manner there, a lot. I mean, the Act prescribes actually the journals, the National Act, which are considered, you know, of a good quality for different disciplines. And it was difficult to get the project that I'm just finishing, which is on sex work, which is interdisciplinary. But I really enjoy doing that, and as you said, it is necessary to address the challenges of today's society. But the other thing is, I think, is also to simplify the science in a way. I don't think the point is when you do interdisciplinary work to now have two intelligible languages and to, you know, be in such a specific discourse, but rather actually to bring it it can become, I think, more accessible using different methods and different discourses, and in a way challenging this idea of science and scientists as, you know, these superhumans with just big heads, because we also have other organs, including hearts. And this is something that I think interdisciplinarity means for me as well, so I just wanted to see if anybody resonates with that. Thanks.
I completely do, and I think the other thing, I guess, which is supporting interdisciplinarity is that some of it is bottom up, and I think most good interdisciplinary work starts that way. But actually, there is some useful movement from top down as well, and I think particularly you're thinking about engagement with non-academics and the whole move towards co-production, I think has been very beneficial for interdisciplinary work.
It's interesting you should talk about the sciences. When law was trying to assert itself as a discipline in UK law schools, which at that time would have been Oxford, Cambridge and the London colleges, they very much presented the black letter doctrinal method that they were developing as a form of science in which the cases were the data that they analysed. So that was all part of gaining legitimacy for law as a discipline. And in some ways, the core curriculum, which, to go back to Lucy's question, then was developed in that image. But what you've got now in the 21st century is an awful lot more fields of study beyond the core. All self-respecting law schools have to offer a whole range of options. Among the most popular options, if you want to call them that, are medical law, incredibly popular, environmental law, and also family law, and all of these can intersect quite obviously, and labour law as well, can intersect quite obviously and deeply with contiguous disciplines. So that, again, going back to Lucy's question, is another way in which the curriculum has loosened, I think, enough to not only allow people to jump discipline, but to make them attractive to university law schools because they want someone with a particular speciality.
What you say though is really interesting, and it's quite important, because I do think, you know, we can always slip, I can always slip into being a little bit too glib about some of these things, and I don't really want to be. And when you were saying, in your particular instance in Croatia, you know, you feel, by the sounds of it, a little bit forced into a particular bracket, a particular position. I don't think any of us, probably speaking for myself, certainly not me, would want to deny that that can happen. I mean, it may happen elsewhere. I'm sure it happens outside the UK. It certainly happens in the UK. And I'm saying, I think, you know, I'm sure that we all have that feeling that we sort of are being pushed around a bit into a particular kind of corner we don't really want to be in. And we have to recognise that. I mean, I think there are two things I would say. I think Anne-Marie's already said one of them anyway, which is that it's down to us as individuals, as we shape our career, to tell our own stories as we go through. We have to do this. We have to do this because no one's going to do it for us. You know, we have to make our own stories. And it's tough at the beginning, I suspect, when we're trying to work out what the story is, actually. But then as we go on, some people will decide that they want to pursue a relatively narrow quote unquote disciplinary path. Probably tricky in our field, but less tricky probably in Joanne's if that's what they want to do. If you really want to do it, go and be an economist. But others will, as they get on with their careers, they will begin to see opportunities in different ways. The issues that come at them will undoubtedly be requiring an interdisciplinary response, I suspect. And all I can say is that I do understand that, I do understand things, but I think we have to sort of push against them. And then there is this institutional problem. There is an institutional problem where you have university hierarchies thinking they know best. And they don't, actually, is the truth. They just don't. They may in physics, for all I know. I don't know anything about physics, so I have no idea. But when it comes to the social sciences, they can be really quite wrong about how they respond, in this case to REF, which is one of the things we're talking about, but how they respond anyway. Because on the one hand, they are saying, oh, you've got to go out there and be interdisciplinary. And I've been in rooms of people from different quote-unquote disciplines, and you sit there like a lemon, not knowing what on earth to say, because it's not come from us, it's come from an institutional desire to be seen to be interdisciplinary. But actually, that interdisciplinarity can occur and does occur naturally. You've only got to look at the things in your conference to know this. You don't actually have to look any further.
Sorry, just briefly, and I very much want Roz to come in, but the other thing we can add to this is that we've got a tradition of interdisciplinarity that now goes back 3 or 4 decades in law, and longer on Joanne's telling about analytical philosophy. So that we can say we've got journals, we've got conferences, we've got associations, there are authors we cite and methods that we learn, annual methods classes. And that can be counterposed to the higher level people who are saying, do it so you can take a box, do it so we can get money, do it so we can comply with these things.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Raza Said. I'm an associate professor of law at University of Warwick. And I work in social-legal studies, although I obviously don't have the overview that our esteemed panel has on the work that goes on in the UK. So it's encouraging to see at one level that the REF has taken a different view on interdisciplinary work, and hopefully the sort of recruitment committees and the committees in the universities will catch up at some point to make it easier for ECRs. But one of the things that I want to say is that I was trained as a social scientist before I came into law. I worked as a development practitioner as well. So one of the things that I see is that we have a lot of multidisciplinary work where people bring in different disciplines, but we use one discipline's logic or its framework or its methodology to apply to the other. So in terms of interdisciplinary work, I see examples of people like myself working within social sciences but crossing into law and finding it difficult because the hierarchy of sources, the sort of issues of binding precedent and so on, they're quite difficult to make sense of initially. At the same time, when we move from law to social sciences or other disciplines, we take texts as sacred when they shouldn't be. And so it becomes quite difficult for early career researchers to find the core principles and the logic within those frameworks early on. And so that's why I'm saying that maybe some work is multidisciplinary rather than interdisciplinary. So with your overview, is there something that you could advise people who are working in different disciplines or moving across disciplines?
I think that when you, it's very difficult to say this, I think that when you have an idea and you want to pursue something, a particular line of inquiry, we all have in our heads that at some point that line of inquiry is going to end up in a publication. We hope, somewhere or other. But it does seem to me that as you as you pursue that, you have to get clear, you have to hone down as you go through the reading, what kind of journals are likely to respond to the particular kind of approach you're taking. Because you're absolutely right. Not every journal, you can't just chuck something in any journal just because it might be legal or it might be social policy. Journals do have particular kinds of flavour to them, they do. And I think as you go through, you have to kind of work out, you have to narrow the field down. Well, yeah, actually, in the end, I'm going to aim it at that journal, or I'm going to have three journals in mind, and I'll see how it goes, and oh, that's the one. I mean, for example, if I was writing something around public policy, maybe something around, policy transfer or something, I'm personally not going to send it to the British Journal of Political Science or Political Studies, because the way that I happen to work will always bring in some social policy stuff, and they probably fussy, they don't like it, but I would go to something like policy and politics, for example, which is really good at publishing across the political and social kind of spectrum, if you see what I mean. So you can, I think, as you go through a particular kind of journey of a research project, you can begin to see which kinds of outlets are right for you, which comes back to the whole thing about telling your own story, actually, and trying to work out how to pursue that.
I think that's a really important point, Nick. But I think when you get to our stage of our career, we really do, we have a very strong sense of the character or flavour of particular journals, whereas with an early career researcher, it's all just, a foreign language, if you like. And what I think about that is, when I entered academia, I benefited hugely from the support and mentoring of senior academics who took an interest in me, who liked my work, who encouraged me, who criticised me. I didn't have a supervisor because I didn't do a PhD, so I had that benefit. And I've remembered that all through my career, and now when I'm at that point where I have this accumulation of knowledge about journals and about the field of law and so on and so forth, I try and spread it as far as it will go. But most importantly, if you're an early career scholar, you should expect the senior academics in your institution and in your field to be helping, supporting and nurturing you, because that is part of their job as senior academics, is to sustain research after they're no longer in the field. What's the point of it if it's not going to be sustained beyond you? So it's just part of that circle of time. So you should look to your senior academics to have discussions about, should I put it in this journal or not? I've been invited to participate in this collection of edited collection. What do you think? Have those conversations. And if they don't want to have them with you, well, they're not doing their job.
Sorry, I should have said that. I mean, that's obviously part of the journey, is of course using your networks and using people. Absolutely use them all, definitely.
And I think both learning societies, have been playing, an increasing role in terms of mentoring, during the conferences, having mentoring sessions, having insights into publishing schemes and things like that. So, and I definitely think, speaking from an SPA perspective, that the PGR, ECR agenda, we are becoming much more engaged with, and definitely understand how we have to develop in terms of supporting our early career colleagues, and I think it's very much the same story from SLSA, John.
Thank you, Marie. I was going to put you on the spot about that, but you took the spot anyway. Yeah, very much for SLSA, as I said at the start of the session, this is the beginning of our work on interdisciplinarity, on more formal support on crystallising the networks that Joanne was speaking about, and collaborating with other societies like SPA, so that we can pass that on, but also so that we can mobilise the expertise that's out there and support younger colleagues. Are there any other questions?
Just to add to that, John,
Yeah.
while people are thinking of questions,
Yeah.
I mean, one advantage that early career scholars have now that we didn't have is you've got the internet and you've got Zoom. And some of us are lucky enough to be in law schools or social policy schools, which are very collegiate and supportive. Others of us might find ourselves in a school where the kind of work that we do is totally different from everybody else, and we feel a little isolated. And it's much more difficult then maybe to go to a senior professor if they're just so far apart from what you're doing. In that context, if you're feeling that sense of isolation, well, obviously, try and move. That's the long-term plan, because if you're not getting stimulated at your institution and supported, then it's not the right research environment for you. But build your networks within your field by going not just to the big conferences like that, but coming to a few that are very much focused in your area. Build relationships that way, and then you can continue with those relationships via Zoom, even email and WhatsApp and all of those things. It's ways, and those are ways in which you can get support and offer support to people who feel isolated.
Thanks very much, Joanne. We've run out of time, and I know that Ciara and Mark will want us to stick to time because we've got a great reception planned at St. Colum's Hall, where the Undertones used to play. I don't know if anyone remembers the Undertones. Yes, that's a big draw. Ciara, do you want to say something? Thanks very much, Ciara. Can I have a round of applause for our panel?